Hello everyone and welcome to my session for this year's Cyber Back to School, and it's the first year of Cyber Back to School, and a big thanks to Captain Hyperscaler and his security focused sidekick Captain Cyberscaler for putting on this event and hoping to see this run for many years to come. I'm going to kick off this with a bit of a song. Okay, and this is the song that when you hear it on the radio, it's always going to stick in your head. It's always there, and it's Paul Simon's 50 Ways to Leave Your Lover. And at this point, this song is almost 50 years old. And it came on the radio a while back, and it got me thinking. I was humming away for a couple of days, and it got me thinking, if there's 50 ways to leave your lover, well, maybe we could rework that song and reword it. Let's think about, is there 50 ways to secure your Azure? We probably could make a song out of it. Don't worry, I'm not going to sing, so please don't turn off this video or switch on to the next one. Bear with me for a few minutes and let's look and see if we can find those 50 ways. And that's the session, 50 ways to secure your Azure. I'm Michael Durkan. I am a Microsoft MVP in Azure, an Azure Solutions Architect. I've created LinkedIn Learning Instructor courses. I'm Azure certified, and I'm a speaker and a content creator, and you'll find various bits of me out there on my YouTube channel and my blog, and I'll give you the links for that at the end of the session. So obviously, once we migrate to the cloud, all your infra issues are resolved. Right? Wrong. Because that's what cloud providers and cloud consultants tell people. It's not that simple. Okay, and cloud security, obviously, given that there is a big shift to the cloud away from on-premises solutions at the minute, we've seen the various things happening with, things like VMware and Broadcom, everything that's happening really with the cloud where, is it more cost effective for you to run your solutions in the cloud in a scalable fashion as opposed to purchasing hardware to run it on-premise? Well, that's what we're here to have a look at and work out now. Giving a quick intro into cloud security. More and more organizations are adopting that cloud first approach, and it enables them to modernize their services and transition their operations and transform them with agility at scale. But obviously, security and compliance risk remains the biggest barrier to cloud adoption. When you combine that with the difficulties in addressing the complexity of secure configuration and a shortage of skills, these can be major roadblocks to a cloud first journey. So how do you get around that? So when you're preparing for your journey to cloud, obviously best practices. And if you look at the cloud best practices, that's around designing and deploying base security controls to create secure landing zones on your provider platform of choice. Now that could be Azure. Obviously this is an Azure session, but we could be talking about AWS, Google Cloud, your own private cloud, up there in the public cloud if you're a large enough company to be able to run that. It's around designing reusable solutions. Okay, so each cloud solution provider is going to provide you with secure platform, infrastructure, and software as a service components, and you'll be able to use the templates for that and use integrated security controls with each of those services. When you combine those services, you bring together the existing client enterprise security tools with the operational processes and procedures that your business and your organization wants to enforce. Okay, so you merge all of those together. What are the actions you need to take? Okay, so you need to spell out the roles that are authorized to operate in the environment and what they're allowed to do. You then need secure connectivity. So generally that's a hub and spoke model. So you secure your connectivity between your on-premise data centers to the cloud, and you're going to use a hub and spoke network security model. Okay. And basically your landing zone configuration policies, you secure those and you apply the cloud service provider platform security controls. So in our case, we'll be talking about things like Sentinel, Defender for Cloud, Azure Policy from the Microsoft side. And again, we'll get into those in a little bit more detail. Before we dive into the Azure side of it and all the services, what are the common threats in cloud environments? Okay, and the most common threats really, there's a list of them here. We're going to go through them one by one. Let's start with misconfiguration. And that's one of the leading causes of cloud data breaches. So the infrastructure is designed to be easily usable and to enable easy data sharing, but because of its complexity, it's easy for misconfiguration or security oversight to leave your cloud-based resources exposed. Let's move on to unauthorized access. And unlike an on-premises infrastructure, cloud-based deployments are outside a network perimeter. Now, you can still create your network perimeter, obviously, but you're not just sitting in front of a firewall anymore, or behind a firewall rather, where you've got a single IP into your organization. There's a lot more things there. The cloud is convenient. It's convenient for accessibility of the environment for both employees and customers. And you think about things like OneDrive and SharePoint sharing. If it's by default, it's turned on that you can share externally. Bad idea, obviously, because a misconfiguration there could give someone unauthorized access. Let's look at unsecured interfaces. Normally what happens with CSPs or cloud providers will provide a number of APIs and interfaces for their customers. And these are normally well documented in an attempt to make them easily usable. Okay, but if they're not secured correctly, they can be used by a cyber criminal to identify and exploit potential methods for accessing and exfiltrating sensitive data from an organization's cloud environment. Hijacking of accounts, and this is going into weak passwords, weak password security. And that's also around password reuse and the use of weak passwords. And this exacerbates the impact of phishing attacks, data breaches, and it enables a single stolen password to be used on multiple different accounts. Yes, that is still happening out there, okay? And it means that if you're using a password for your cloud account or your Gmail account or your Facebook, your personal accounts, an attacker is going to search and see if they're using that for your corporate account as well. So therefore, that could give them access to sensitive data or functionality. That's an important one. Visibility. You've got traditional monitoring platforms, okay? And the traditional monitoring platforms and the tools that we use for on-premises visibility are not effective for cloud environments. There is no one size fits all here, okay? And this limits your ability to monitor cloud-based resources and protect them against the attack, okay? We touched on external data sharing above briefly, and the cloud is designed to make data sharing easy. And it gives you the option to explicitly invite both internal and external users via email or a shared link that enables anyone with the URL access to the shared resource. It's convenient for collaboration, but it's a major cloud security issue. Malicious insiders. Malicious insiders are a major security issue, and that could be, an insider that already has authorized access to a network and some of the sensitive resources it contains. And attempts to gain this level of access are what reveals most attackers to their target. And it makes it hard for an unprepared organization to detect that malicious insider. From a cyber attacks perspective, cloud infrastructure is directly accessible from the public internet and is often improperly secured. So it contains a great deal of sensitive and valuable data. Cloud is used by many different companies as well, and it means that a successful attack can likely be repeated many times with a high probability of success. Okay? Cloud deployments are a common source of cyber attacks. Finally, denial of service attacks. And this is, I think, where a lot of businesses are facing the challenges, right? Because the cloud is essential to many organizations' ability to do business. They use the cloud to store their business critical data, to run important internal and customer facing applications. And a DDoS attack can basically take down the entire environment, okay? And normally these attackers may demand a ransom in order to stop the attack. Okay, so that's a big one. Looking at the overview of Azure security and basically how it all ties together, the architecture. If we look at this diagram here, we see that there's a number of different layers of this, okay, that you need to be aware of. Okay, so from an identity and access management perspective, you've got your threat protection, your cloud security, your information protection, information governance, all the way down to compliance management, insider risk management, and the ability to discover and respond. Okay. For all cloud deployment types, you need to be aware of the shared responsibility model. Okay, and that really depends on what you're deploying on. So if we go back to the on-premise days, you were responsible for everything. When we moved into IaaS, which was kind of like VMs, cloud provider takes responsibility for the physical hosts, network and data center, but all of the other stuff is yours. You move up to PaaS, it slightly dilutes a little bit because the operating system is managed by the cloud provider. And obviously then when you move into SaaS, They're providing the OS, the network, and the applications, and all you're basically doing is looking after your accounts, your identities, okay? But regardless of what type of deployment, you always retain responsibilities for your data, your endpoints, and your account access management. They're the important ones. When we look at identity and access management solutions in the Microsoft ecosystem, okay, obviously Azure AD, as we all knew it, has now become Entra ID, and there's various different flavors of Entra ID that exist out in the world. So we start off with the free version, which is basically security defaults, and that's mobile app as a second factor, and you've got MFA, okay? You've also got self-service password reset available to you there, okay? If you move up and you go up to the free tier and give yourself a global admin, okay, that gives you a little bit more. It gives you SMS, it gives you admin control, and it gives you remembered MFA for trusted devices, okay? Office 365, if you're moving up to that layer and integrating your Office 365 with Entra, that's going to give you slightly more. And then we move up into the Entra Premium SKUs, okay, and license models where you've got P1 and P2. And basically that gives you everything, okay? The only difference between P1 and P2 is giving you the addition of risk-based conditional access, okay? And all of this is around making sure your identities and your infrastructure from an identity perspective is fully secured. So you've got identity management that's backed by role-based access control. We mentioned MFA, that is normally done by mobile phone, by the Authenticator app now, but obviously, there are better methods out there, such as FIDO security keys, which is an interesting other method that you can use, because we're moving away from the SMS and phone call days now at this stage. And that ties in then fully with identity governance and access packages, okay, where you're giving people access to a predefined set of roles via the access package, and you're then using privileged identity management if they want the elevated access that is contained within those roles. So in effect, the access package is giving you the eligibility to request the PIM roles that you need. Okay, bit of a mouthful, but it's security by default, effectively. If we move down the chain, then let's move into network security. And obviously, in any Azure network, you're going to create a virtual network. Okay, that virtual network, we're going to break it down into subnets, and each subnet is probably going to have its own NSG. Okay, that's normally the best practice that you'd have there. You can then have your route tables, so there's route tables built into Azure, but you can create your own user-defined route tables as well that will send all of your traffic back to an Azure firewall for inspection, detection, and routing capabilities of what is allowed to pass through the firewall, and you do that from both an application and a platform security perspective. Okay, you then have things like service endpoints and private links, okay, and they're important because they segregate and they either give you direct access into the service you need, or if you're building out a layered architecture, as we'll see in a few minutes, your private endpoint serves as another layer of defense, because it means that only one part of the application can talk to another, okay, and it just gives you that bit of separation. Moving up into data security, you've got the Azure Storage Encryption Service, okay, and all of the Azure services are encrypted by default. You can either bring your own storage encryption keys, or you can use the managed keys that are provided by the Azure platform. From a database encryption perspective, you've got Azure SQL database encryption features that are built in, and obviously then we've all used Key Vault to manage our keys, certificates, secrets, passwords, etc., and we can call those from within the applications if we want that secure access as well. So, again, really good security features in there. Let's move down the chain again, and let's move into application security. Okay, the first thing you'd probably look at for an application security, if you're hosting an application that has a web front end, you'd put an application gateway with a web application firewall in front of it. Okay, that's going to give you the core OWASP rule set. Okay, OWASP 3.2. When you enable that, okay, the thing to be aware of here, that it's zero trust. Every rule is turned on by default. So what you effectively have to do is, and this is where you're separating out your dev, system test, user acceptance testing, environments before you get into prod. You need to test to make sure that the rule set matches. You can put in exclusions for specific rule sets. Okay, that's an important one. Another way you can protect is via API management. You can use API management policies. A lot of customers will use API keys to access the applications. You can do secure deployments with Azure DevOps and GitHub. What you're doing there is you're building in, obviously in DevOps and GitHub as well, the new feature of workload identity federation, which is built directly into the platform, and you just authenticate into your deployments then. If you're a Terraform person, you can use drift detection alerts. Again, that's a lovely little feature to have, where you can detect, obviously we all want to have our deployments and our resources deployed via IAC and managed that way, and that kind of becomes our configuration management. Drift detection, what that's going to do is it's going to detect any changes that may have been operated by ClickOps. It'll give you alerts, and you can integrate that back into your DevOps or your GitHub, into your tasks or into your PBIs or user stories, etc., to raise tasks or alerts if any of that happens. Okay, nice feature, interesting one. And you can do container security with Azure Kubernetes Service. The one thing I didn't mention up there about App Gateway, actually, you've now got App Gateway for containers available as well. So again, it's another interesting one, another good application security feature to have. When we get into monitoring and detection, okay, and again, lots of features available to you here. Obviously, you've got Defender for Cloud, which is Microsoft's full suite of services. You can plug that in basically anywhere. You've got Defender for storage, Defender for containers, Defender for identity, Defender for 365, etc. So, you know, there's loads of available features in Defender for Cloud. Obviously, they all cost as add-ons, but, you know, it's all there. And you can do that by either, you know, simple cloud security management or a per resource security management model. Moving into Azure Advisor recommendations, obviously they're available on every Azure resource that you're running. Okay, it'll give you advisor recommendations to say that, you know, you're either not monitoring this, you don't have enough security, you need to move to a different SKU, etc. Azure Monitor and Log Analytics, obviously that gives you the power of things like KQL queries. You can export workbooks out of that, and you can also export the stuff out to Azure Managed Grafana. Lovely service, but it is very expensive, okay, to run Grafana. So you really need to be looking for those in-depth metrics to be running Grafana, and probably have a larger environment as well. And finally then, you know, I suppose Sentinel is the thing that really, it connects everything, okay? That's your cloud native security, information and event management. So your SIEM and also your SOAR, your security orchestration, automation and response solution. It's collecting data from your Azure services, from your on-premise services, or from your third-party sources, and is using advanced analytics and machine learning to detect those incidents and anomalies. And it can automatically respond to incidents by triggering predefined playbooks, blocking an IP address, or isolating a compromised device, for example. Okay, and you've got your integration with 365 Defender, Azure Security Center, and other tools. Okay, so as an example, as a scenario, let's just say a cloud-hosted application in Azure is facing a sudden increase in fatal login attempts from multiple geographies, and it might indicate a brute force attack. So Azure AD Identity Protection will detect the suspicious sign-ins and flag the accounts. Sentinel will correlate the data with other security events, and it'll identify it as a coordinated attack. Azure Firewall then, which we saw on the Network Security tab, will log the incoming traffic and block the malicious IP addresses. You then have Defender for Cloud will issue a recommendation to strengthen the application security configuration, and Azure Monitor will log all of these events, and the security team can then review all the incidents through a centralized dashboard, which you may create using either Grafana or Azure Workbooks. Okay, so again, some really good security features there. Moving into threat detection and response. Okay, and first one we're going to see here is Azure DDoS protection. Okay, and this protects your applications from DDoS attacks. It gives you automated monitoring and mitigation, and you can do this at either tenant or IP level. Okay, so you can do it for your entire tenant, or you can do it on a per IP basis. Depends on what's the most cost effective for your organization. DDoS is continuously monitoring the traffic flows and detecting those abnormal increases in traffic volumes and the patterns associated with DDoS attacks. It'll detect volumetric, protocol-based and application layer attacks, and it'll mitigate the attacks by scaling up the resources or diverting traffic, and then it'll send the detailed analytics and reports off to Azure Monitor and Security Center. Okay, you've got Defender for Identity then, which will track user behavior, detecting the anomalies or malicious behavior. So Defender for Identity was formerly Azure Advanced Threat Protection, that you may have known it by before. This will use, same as the previous service, advanced machine learning to identify those identity-based attacks. It'll generate the alerts, and it can be integrated with Sentinel for broader threat detection and response. And then obviously you've got your instant response, which is linked to your Azure security benchmarks, and that's all enforced with Azure policy. Okay, so you can go for CIS, NIST, PCI DSS, ISO 27001. All of those security benchmarks are fully built into Azure and into Azure policy, and you can enable those from Azure policy. Let's take a look at an example like we did in the previous slide from threat protection and response, where you've got a web app hosted on Azure starts experiencing high number of failed login attempts from multiple geographies. Again, AD identity protection will detect the activity, Sentinel correlates the data, Azure Firewall will log and block, the malicious IP addresses, and Defender for Cloud will give you a recommendation to tighten the network security. From a security best practices perspective, obviously we're talking principle of least privilege as the most important one, and that's going to be Azure resource based, and you keep your user based roles obviously, totally separate. Okay, and obviously then if you're dealing with synced identities in 365, obviously separate your cloud admin accounts from your regular user accounts. From a compliance perspective, you've got Azure policy, and that's going to do your regular security audits and compliance checks, and you can get reporting out of that as well. And then you're into your data backup and recovery strategies. Okay, so we looked at the various attack and misconfigurations that can happen, and that's where you need your data backup and recovery to be in place. You've also got things like in platform as a service solutions. For example, app service will give you staging slots where you can have development and production slots running, okay, just in case there's an issue with configuration or in case there's an attack, you can quickly swap the slots, making sure that everything's there. And obviously from an IaaS perspective, you've got Azure Backup there, which will back up things like your VMs, your SQL databases, etc. And obviously then you can plug any third-party solutions like Veeam, Commvault, Veritas or Rubrik into the solution as well to take, backups if those are the third-party backup vendors that you're using. So from the tools and integrations perspective, obviously we talked about the Defender suite extensively there, the capabilities that has to, go down to the levels of storage, identity, containers, virtual machines, Defender for Kubernetes, I'm sure it's a thing. That's all available to you in the platform. It's all there. You've got Sentinel again, which will give you your runbooks and your instant response, or you've got Azure Information Protection, which will deal with the underlying compliance tools for all of the underlying data that you've got on the platform. That'll also detect your malicious insiders as well. From a third-party perspective, for the integrations, obviously you've got the multi-cloud providers, and that could be utilizing something like Azure Arc if you're using part of your solutions on Azure. If part of it's on AWS, part of it's on Google Cloud, for example, you can plug Arc into all of those services, and you can also plug it into on-premise as well. And Azure Arc will fully and centrally manage all of those multi-cloud integrations for you from a single pane of glass. You can also go with third-party integrations as well, and you've got vendors like Qualys, QRadar, Fortinet and Datadog, which can fully integrate into the Azure platform, and you can offload all of your logs, all of your SIEM and SOC into those if required. Let's just touch briefly on secure access. So obviously, if your application is presented and it's cloud-based, you want to have a secure way of accessing that to diagnose issues, to look at logs, to do development. on the application. Okay, number of ways you can do this. Obviously, Azure Virtual Desktop is there, where you can publish either remote apps, so you can publish the actual application to the user remotely, or you can publish a full remote desktop, and they can be either personal or pooled desktops if required. Cost-effective solution, Azure Virtual Desktop. What's the disadvantage of it? Obviously, you've got to manage all of the images yourself. It adds an extra layer of complexity. You've got Windows 365 Cloud PC, which is the other version of Azure Virtual Desktop. That's on a per user license assignment basis within the 365 platform as well, though. The other option you've got is Azure Bastion. Okay, and obviously Azure Bastion gives you a single point of access because you can go across peered VNets to your solution. Okay, problem with Bastion though, it's not configurable. The one I've left off here is Azure DevBox. Okay, and similar to Bastion, not configurable, very low level. So you know it's another one to explore when it comes to secure access. So with that, let's throw this up on the screen, and this is basically a quick diagram of how you would have a sample landing zone for, let's say, an enterprise application. So as we can see, from your external user is coming in, the first thing they're going to hit is an application gateway. It's going to be protected with a WAF. You've then got a back end, okay, which is your application back end down the bottom right here, where your resource group, where your application lives. You've got a virtual network, and your application is split into subnets, and in each subnet you have got each of your services. So you've got API management in one subnet, then you've got your container apps, then you've got your Cosmos DB, your Redis cache, your Key Vault, your SQL database if required. You can see that all of those are protected. They've got an NSG attached to every subnet, and you've also got a private link then, which links directly back. So obviously the app gateway will feed into the API backend pool, and basically the chain goes through then, okay, so that only the container apps can access the Cosmos, Redis cache, etc., etc. So it's all secured correctly. From a corporate office perspective, you're connecting via ExpressRoute or to site-to-site VPN through a virtual network gateway, and then you're routing through the firewall for your onboard routing. From a management perspective, in the top, up at the top there, you've got your log analytics and app insights. You've got your DNS zones, your virtual machine scale set for your private build agents, for your Azure DevOps or GitHub agents lives up there. And you've also got a Key Vault then for that. And then up at the top, you've got all your services there. So we talked about Defender for Cloud. We talked about DDoS protection, Entra ID. You've obviously got B2C. If you've got consumers who are coming into the service and need a secured, isolated tenant to where you want to manage their identity, so that's what your B2C is for. Azure load testing, really interesting tool. I really like this. You can simulate with via either URL based or JMeter based testing whether your application works or not. And obviously then you've got your cost management tools. That's leading back into your FinOps, and you've got your 365 and your Azure Virtual Desktop, as I previously mentioned before. Okay, so this all ties together in the one subscription. You can also probably see in each of the resource groups, we've also got our UDRs there, and the UDRs talk back to the firewall, so all the traffic from everywhere gets sent back to the firewall for inspection, and basically then it's routed as to, it decides whether it's going to be routed outbound or routed around the various different VNets and subnets within your subscription. So that's just a very high level overview of what sample landing zone would look like. Staying up to date with Azure security. So you've got the various certifications that are available. You've got AZ500, which is the Azure security exam that's been around for quite a while now, and then you've got all of the new SC exams, which are the security focused exams. You've got the fundamentals, of course every track has got a fundamentals, and then you've got the various different exams which are broken into the various specialist areas, let's call it. So SC200 deals with Defender, Sentinel, SOC and SIEM. SC300 deals specifically with identity and access and secured identity and access solutions. and SC400 is around your compliance and your Azure information protection. Once you pass either the AZ 500 or the SC 200, 300 or 400, you can then qualify to go for the SC 100, which is the Cybersecurity Architect, which is the 3-star exam. It's the highest level security exam you can get. And obviously you don't have to pass all of the exams, but you know, if you want a kind of a high level overview, would recommend that you do it. Outside of the certifications, then it's not all about certifications. You obviously got security blogs, newsletters and community forums. Tech community have got, you know, their own dedicated security area where they deal with all of the various different services such as, you know, Defender, identity, information protection. And then you've got the various people in the community. So Rod Trent, Speaker 25 at Microsoft. If you're not following his blog, get onto his blog, subscribe. He sends out a weekly newsletter full of great tips. Rory Campbell deals an awful lot with things like compliance, information protection. Some of his stuff is really, really good. Charlie Goff as well deals with the Defender, Sentinel identity side of things. And then, of course, there is Captain Hyperscaler / Cyberscaler himself, Dwayne Natwick. Not actually sure what night Dwayne wears his various different capes, or maybe he does it all in one night. Maybe he really is Batman, who knows. But Dwayne is an invaluable resource, you know, not just for Microsoft security, but general security as well. Talks a lot about ISACA, ISC2, CompTIA, all of the really, really... Dwayne gets into the nitty gritty of the security world at that wider level. Okay, so really good guys to follow there. So, conclusion. We've moved on from the good old days of just having a firewall sitting in front of your infrastructure, and we're now into kind of the fine tuning of monitoring and alerting and kind of well managed. And that's what we're looking for. We're looking for well managed, well architected, layered, and defense in depth. That's what we're looking for. We're looking for those key 4 things across the scope of our solution and the scope of our entire infrastructure. And obviously then we want to have our regular audits and access reviews tied into that, because that's going to, you know, that's where we're going with the continuous monitoring, continuous alerting, making sure that we're dealing with principle of least privilege, as we said, and making sure that people who have access have the correct access. And what we're also dealing with then is the concept of, you know, as emerging security threats happen, that we're dealing with those, we're auditing those, and we're constantly auditing the security posture of our solutions. That is all from me. I'm sure you're sick of hearing me talking at this stage. Thank you very much for watching. And again, thanks very much to Dwayne for organising this awesome community event. You can contact me on my blog, where I write various articles on Azure networking and some Azure security bits. You can email me directly. We're all part of the community. I am open to emails and chats from anyone. And you can find me on Twitter, LinkedIn, and there is a variation of this that I did for Azure Spring Clean, I believe, up on my YouTube channel. So you can rewatch this, and obviously it's going to be available on the Cyber Back to School channel as well. So thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed this session, and I will see you on the next one. Thanks, folks. Bye-bye.